day, everyone. We are back on our Insights chat today on Friday, the 16th of April. And today we're talking to the acting head at the CLTD at Wits, Mr. Gerrit Wissing. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So we recently, a colleague of ours came across a post that Mr. Wissing posted on LinkedIn, and it had all to do with educational technology. And I'm going to just read a little excerpt from it because it's quite an interesting quote. It basically read, with educational technology, we have those who pick a technology, then go around applying the technology to everything they encounter. If you have a hammer, everything's a nail. Then we have those who examine what is being learned and then pick a technology suited to supporting such learning. I think such an analogy and reasoning can be applied to assessments too. So to the process of assessments. So we've asked today if we could pick Mr. Wissing's brain about, or Gerrit's brain about this whole concept around assessments, and especially with the shift to digital assessments in post-COVID era. I mean, that is something I think that we've all had to deal with, a lot of institutions is. So maybe we should start with that, with the first question being around how things have changed during COVID, and how different is digital assessments versus a face-to-face or in classroom pen and paper assessment. Thank you and welcome, Gerrit.
Thanks, Jolene. So maybe just to step back a little bit, some context about the quote that you read from. Sugata Mitra on Facebook had a conversation about assessments, and he said that the kind of PhD defense that you do, they call it a Viva in the UK. So he reckoned instead of having written exams, you should have Vivas for everything, and students should come and explain what it is that they learned. And it struck me as a little bit ironic that you would say that this kind of default state of having a written assessment for everything, that's just having a default state is wrong, and then trying to replace that with a default state of a Viva. And that's where the hammer and the nail analogy comes from, is if you've got a popular way of assessing something, and then you want to go around and force it into applying that way of assessment to everything, you'll end up having bad assessments, whether that's a written assessment or whether that's a Viva, or whether it's whatever it is that your tool of choice is, you'll end up having bad assessments. So the way to get to good assessment is through a process of curriculum design, where you start with outcomes, you look at what the assessment criteria is, you develop, do backwards design, as they call it, to get to the kind of learning that will lead to achievement of the outcomes. And then you assess in line with your assessment criteria. So the question is, what it is that people need to learn? And the second question is, what does people have to do to demonstrate that they've learned what they should have learned? So it's a good assessment comes from a process of good curriculation. And so if you don't go through that process of constructive alignment, you will just end up with bad assessment. And so what we saw with the pivot, unfortunately, is pre-COVID we had a lot of sit-down exams, and people weren't thinking about different types of exams. And so when COVID came around, they were just dropping back into what they used to do face-to-face and trying to replicate that online. So that's what happened. We tried to do online what we normally would have done face-to-face. And in some areas, people recognized that there would be challenges. So the idea of academic honesty became a bit of a challenge. We had challenges around that. We saw websites like Edtech, which were fast enough to give solutions to students in real time as they were busy writing exams. So there are allegations of serious amounts of cheating that went on. I haven't seen the disciplinary cases come before the proper organs of the university yet, so I'm not too sure to what extent we did have cheating. We've had allegations of cheating. I don't know if that happened, but I think it happened because we have poor assessments. So if you can cheat on an exam, pretty much because your assessment is a bad assessment. Because an exam that you can cheat on, an exam that you can copy from somebody else is you have to ask the question that's been answered before.
Yeah, it's not making
you've
you
got
think. Yeah.
So if you can look at your mate's stuff, where you can, phone a friend to get the answer to a question, that means the answer is known. So you don't have to think constructively, critically to get to the answer to the question. So I think that's the bigger challenge that we have with assessment, and it's not unique to online. It's been like that before COVID as well. So we knew even before COVID that our assessments aren't good, and we had over 2 years probably prior to COVID, we had symposia at Wits where we were saying, okay, we need to get to better assessment because there's a huge amount of sit-down exams that we have every year, and it's a logistic nightmare. And then there's a re-exam, and there's a re-exam, and it became a nightmare. So we've been looking at better assessments even before COVID. And so in a strange way, what COVID did for us is it made the logistics of the assessments even a little bit easier, because you put people in front of computers at home and they log in and they do the exam. So there's no people walking around handing out papers and booking venues. It's, in a sense, it's easier online to do those kind of assessments, but it does come with some challenges. If it's poor assessments, it does come with challenges around how do you invigilate, how do you prevent cheating, and like I say, that again is a function of poor assessments to start off with. So unless we get to better assessments, we're probably gonna have issues with face to face with logistics, online with dishonesty.
So in a sense, this whole digital the whole approach to digital assessments has actually just kind of exposed what was already wrong, if you put it that way, and how it's not really assessing what a student knows, but rather just it's been such an old archaic system of how we kind of assess what a student knows or doesn't know, that we, in that sense, that's the plus or the positive. So saying that, and obviously if you're looking at where we're going into the future, we don't know how quickly we're going to get out of the current COVID context. So that's something that probably we'll see in the next few years will still be current, where we'll have to do online assessments and a lot of digital assessments. So the way the invigilation process will change and all of that. Are there certain things that you think has been breakthroughs? Have you found some tips or ideas of what could work on assessments, or do you think it's still a question that needs to be answered with time?
So,
Is that a big question? Sorry.
We had I had a story over the weekend. Former colleague whose daughter I think she's a first year at UP at the moment, and she did her first online assessment. And what they do to get around the check issue is they do sequential. They bring the questions up sequentially, and then once you've answered, the question goes away and you can't go back to it. So you kind of take away some affordances from the tool, so students can't go back and revisit for the sake of preventing cheating, for the sake of so you answered your question now, so you can't go to check now and get the answer and come back to a question later type of thing. So we came around some integrity. We got solutions to some integrity issues by actually making the assessment a poorer experience, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
The other thing that did move us a little bit forward, I think, is that people have started considering an open book exam. And so I think we got a little bit better about structuring practical assessments where you can act, where cheating is actually part of the assessment. You say if you tell a person you're allowed to collaborate, you're allowed to consult.
Exactly.
But that means you've got to pay some attention to the assessment that you set up. So we got a little bit better around that, and I think we'll get a little bit better around continuous and continual assessment as well. We don't have the single high stakes exam where it's an all or nothing thing, and it becomes really important to pass that exam, and if you don't pass it, you fail. And so that increases the risk of cheating.
Mm.
But if you think about, let's say, for example, a project-based assessment, and it's a whole year continual assessment project that you do, and it's a really well-structured project that you can't do without mastering all of the foundational knowledge that you need. But we work through that project throughout the year, and you get feedback throughout the year, and by the end of the year, there's no failing that assessment, because you've been working on it the whole year, and you've been fine-tuning it, and you've been building your knowledge around that project. And at the end of the year, it's really a formality that people come and they have a final look at your project, and if they have to, they assign a percentage to that. But there's no high stake event, one single high stake event that is so important that you have to pass this at all costs. And that's probably the driver behind the academic dishonesty is, if you fail it, then you waste your whole family's money, and you can't come back next year. And I don't like the idea of a stressful exam. Learning should be fun. I don't like the high stress stuff.
So I think what you've touched on is there's a lot of challenges that come with the online assessments or digital assessments, but there's also positive things. Maybe we all know that one of the obvious challenges is how do you prevent someone from wanting to cheat, because now you can talk to anyone, you can maybe Google in between. There's a lot of, and there are tools out there preventing it. But if you had to, I think, structure what you're saying now and maybe say there's 2 or 3 top challenges that you could think of, other than the obvious straightforward ones. For instance, have you had or challenges on your side with data access, things like that in assessments, or people not having the right equipment or tools to be able to, for instance, laptops or computers? Are those also quite real challenges at Wits at the moment, or is it something that you haven't really seen?
So I think that's one of the peculiarities of higher education, and perhaps quantitative research that says, let's look at a whole set of data and find an average and a dispersion around the average. And so what we want to do is we want to look at really complex situations and get a single problem, and then we want to have a single solution to that. And unfortunately, that's not higher education. It's not what it is. Higher education is a hugely complex environment, and people come from different environments, and so the diversity is immense. And to think you're going to get one solution to address all of those diversities, that's just unrealistic expectation. So we have really privileged students, and we've got really poor students, and we need to give. On the whole spectrum, we want to have a fairly similar experience as far as possible. And so that's probably not possible, but we need to strive to get the learning experience the same, no matter where on the spectrum you lie. So on one end of that spectrum, we don't really have an issue. We have people sitting and they've got their own dedicated workspace, and they've got electricity, and if the electricity goes down, they've got a backup battery, and they've got like a nice fancy computer with a second screen, and they've got internet. They've got they've got fiber to the home kind of high-speed internet, and they've got enough data, and so they've got everything that they need. And on the other end, you've got students who have none of that. And so we try to cater for that. So let's not talk about the high end of that situation. Let's have a look at some of our bigger challenges, and those would be the students who are staying in informal housing with the rest of the family. There's no line of sight to a mobile device. The internet, the electricity supply is sketchy or absent. There's no dedicated space. So that was a challenge. So you'll know as EiffeCorp that part of what we try to use is GradeScope. And GradeScope had its own challenges. It was a new tool that we also introduced. We waited too late to introduce it, so that brought about its own challenges. But so I think it was a good attempt to try and get people without good devices, good access, to be able to do a handwritten assessment and then take a photograph and upload it, and using the tools within grade scope to do to make the marking experience better for the lecture. So we tried that. I think it was a brave, valiant attempt that we tried to accommodate students who simply wouldn't have been able to do the assessments otherwise. So we do try, but our real challenge is on the disadvantaged end of the spectrum. We looked at some of the data, and with everything that we did to try and get people access, we still had about 8% of students who never went on to the LMS throughout the year. And this year is a little bit lower. But there are still those people. So no matter how well you do, we have 7% of people who never went online. And then there's a significant portion of the students who only went online once. So if you look at the graph, I'm going to try and do it on screen. So you got people who was never online, then you've got a peak of people who went online once, and then you've got a drop in the curve to 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and then slowly it starts picking up again. It never peaks as high as the number who only went online once, but it does pick up towards people who had better access. So there's a significant portion there who's just never had decent access. And what we did at some stage when we could is to try and bring some of those students back onto campus, not for classes, but for them to be in residence and on campus where they have access. And so that's the way in which we try to address some of those challenges.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you also mentioned LMS. So, I mean, that is the reality. It's not only the assessments, it's the whole education process from teaching and learning and delivering assignments and from A to B to Z. And I think that's one of the things that you said is quite valuable, and it's something that probably would be worth looking at post-COVID when we move into whatever that world will look like, is to look at how, I mean, and that's the question that's been going on, as you said, before COVID even, is how do we do assessments? Is what we're doing actually valuable? And then the idea of evaluating someone or a student based on a progress of building up knowledge towards an end goal instead of just doing very basic parrot assessments. But I think that's something that all institutions are facing and are probably sitting on and trying to work through to see what the best ways of assessing, at the end of the day. Also, you need that credibility of a degree, and how do you bring those two together so that you actually getting a student to a point where they add value to a workplace one day, and that the institution's degree still holds that value. So it's always that fine balance of integrity, growing a student, and growing them for the future workplace as well. So it's quite a lot to to take in, and I guess a lot of challenges for everyone involved at institutions, from lecturers to administration, right through faculties. I think everyone's been very innovative despite all of that. So it's always good to hear that, despite the challenges, there have been success stories. Is there, I know this is a off the fly question, but is there any, incidents you can think of that you found has been a successful, where you really felt, wow, it's, this was a bit of a breakthrough during this time? If you don't have an example, that's also fine.
That's an interesting thing. So maybe let's talk about right at the beginning. When we first heard that campuses were going to have to shut down, there was a group of academics who came out and said we need to not carry on until everybody can carry on, and they said we should just stop until until everything's back to normal. Now I remember the first time that the lockdown announced it was going to be for 3 weeks. So people said, let's stop for 3 weeks and then carry on. So that would have turned out pretty badly had we followed that advice. And I want to acknowledge Prof. Habib on this platform, who said, we will carry on. And what I think he gave us 3 weeks. And he said in 3 weeks' time, we're going to go live. So we were in the middle of a recess, and we said, after the recess, we'll be online. Now, in our environment, typically what we try to do is to build relationship with academics and get them to experiment and use influence to sell value. And that's the way that we try to move people from traditional ways onto using technology for learning. And we would get some traction with that, but it was very slow. And every time that you have a technology failure, of course, you lose everybody, and then you start with a with a new cohort. And then I think everybody in this field can tell you the similar stories. But we believe that that's the way to go, to sell value and to use influence to get people to adopt technologies. And Prof. Habib said we'll be on online on, I think it was, what was it, the 20th of April. And on the 20th of April, we were online. And so I think there's much to be said for very, very, very strong support from institutional leadership in changing the direction of the institution. I think if we had to sell value to try and get people online before the 20th of April, we would have failed miserably. So what he did is he said, if you're saying that social justice is about not doing anything, you're not understanding social justice very well.
Yeah.
He said social justice is about enabling. So what we're going to do is we're going to go online and we're going to look at who's struggling, who's not able to go online. And we're going to do everything that we can to get them online, to get them a good experience. And we weren't 100% successful. I told you we had 8% of students that went online. So we weren't 100% successful. We did bring students on campus later on. So we tried to mitigate for that stuff. But my question then is, if we had done nothing, where would we have been today?
Yeah.
We would have been exactly where we were before COVID. We wouldn't have progressed an inch. And at that stage, again, I want to say this, the sector itself was going to wait for a couple of weeks and then go online at the same time. Prof. Habib and the senior executive team said, we'll go online on the 20th. And all of a sudden, the rest of the sector, as far as possible, because we've got an unequal sector. There's some universities that they don't have the means to do what Wits was able to do and what UP and UJ and Stellenbosch, perhaps UCT, was able to do. But Prof. Habib said we're going forward, and the other universities saw we were going forward, and they came along. And so, if you want to talk about pivotal moments, I think that was one of the pivotal moments is when Prof. Habib and the senior executive team said we will be online on the 20th of April, and I think that changed the whole narrative.
I think it's such a great example of just being brave and seeing we can only move forward when we start moving forward. There's no momentum sitting around and waiting. And at some point, as you said, there would have been no progress by now if it wasn't for taking that leap and just trying everything we can. I guess I think everyone is in the same boat in that way.
So we haven't done perfectly. There's such a lot that we need to do better. But we've come a long way. We have come a long way. So the academics, I don't know how they did it. I really don't know, but they did it. So it was actually in that sense, it was an incredible year. It was incredible to be part of that and to see it happen. And like I said, it was nowhere near perfect, but it was a good experience.
Because that's the silver lining that we can always find, I think, in every situation. So I was going to ask, what should we keep? What should we throw back and leave behind when we go through COVID? But I guess in some ways, I don't know if you agree, there's a lot of, I think we probably will try and keep as much as we can and adjust as much as we can so that going forward, we can actually cope with circumstances like this, regardless of anything that comes in the way. So there's just the learning process and the willingness to change probably is one of the biggest things that we'll take with us into the future through all education institutions. Hopefully it's something that people are prepared to change or look at change and adjust. I don't know if there's anything you felt that you think really needs to go with if we talk about 10 years down the line, and we don't know how long it's going to be. So
So one of the questions you said, what does it mean for a post-COVID world? What do you think what's going to happen in the future. And the first point that I'm making against that question is it will look exactly the same as pre-COVID unless we start doing things differently.
Yes.
So we need to understand that if we don't do stuff differently, we won't be doing stuff differently. And it sounds stupid, but that's right at the heart of it. If we don't do stuff differently, we'll do stuff the same way we've always done it. And I am concerned at times when I sit in meetings and I hear people not, they can't wait to get back to normal, back in the classroom where they can carry on doing what they've done before, because they say, online doesn't work. But then when you listen a little bit further into what they're saying, their understanding of online is a narrated PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And so they say a narrated PowerPoint doesn't work. Now, I can give you some metrics that's showing that even the narrated PowerPoint is working better than what happened in the classroom. But that's a biased view. So let's not give you that example. But I am concerned that people think that that we will never have a situation again where we can't be online. We've had it with Fees Must Fall, actually, and Fees Must Fall was a serious warning, really, about what could happen with campuses being shut down, and we ignored it. I'm formerly from John University of Technology, and we had year after year after year after year, we would have protests and the university would shut down, and we would simply not go online. And then COVID happened, and we were unprepared for it, and we shouldn't have been unprepared for it. I think UP and UJ, perhaps to a lesser, more degree, but to some degree at least, were prepared. A strange story with Fees Must Fall. I think about at some stage, Prof. Cheryl, what's her surname, was VC, and she said, we're going to go online. And UP went online, and at that very moment that she said UP has to go online, TUT actually went back to campus. And at the end of Fees Must Fall, UP was online and TUT was nowhere close to being online. Because what TUT they went back to campus, and immediately they started doing catch up in the classroom. And all of the effort went into that. So TUT at the end of Fees Must Fall was face-to-face, and UP at the end of Fees Must Fall was online. And it was a question of 2 weeks, I think, that made that difference.
Yeah.
Between where UP is today and where TUT is today. And so UP, when COVID-19 came along, were far more prepared, I think, than the rest of the sector. And that's a truth that we saw after Fees Must Fall. We did some research about the blended learning type of thing during Fees Must Fall. And there's two stories that came out of that. There were lecturers who were trying to go online during Fees Must Fall, and the students resented that because they felt that the lectures were undermining the protest. The protest. But we had lecturers who were online before Fees Must Fall, and they just carried on. And so that's an important lesson that I learned, is that in the midst of a crisis is a really bad time to try and turn a ship.
Yeah. That's very true.
You've got to be prepared for the crisis. So we're going to come through COVID. I believe we'll come through COVID eventually. I don't know when, but it's not going to be the last one. And so I've said that in a meeting before. People said, but I can't wait to go back to the classroom. And I said, this is not the last time. Next one's going to be worse. So if we don't prepare ourselves well now, and after COVID, when we go back, we keep in mind that this might happen again. Then when the next pandemic comes around, or whatever the next disruptor comes around, once again we'll be unprepared for that. So I get a little bit frustrated when I hear people looking forward to going back to campus. I think it's the wrong move.
So I think if we can sum it up with, I like what you said about, if we don't change the way we're doing things continuously, then nothing will change. So and it is that whole mindset of a post-COVID world, with the pre-COVID current COVID, post-COVID. We should actually just be saying in the future and moving forward and keeping the momentum that we've got now and stay prepared. So yeah, I think that's a good summary. I think our time is almost up. So don't know if there was any last words you wanted to say about, maybe one word if you had to summarize last year and the experience you had. What word would you use to summarize it? I know that's a hard one. But it's always interesting to hear how experiences differ.
Yeah, I think everybody who was and is in the situation have had extremely complex experiences. I have a friend, Facebook, well, he was a school friend, and we had a conversation on Facebook, and he said, "Please, can 2020 just be written out of the history books?" And I said to him, I fully understand that you want to do that. I hear that you've had a horrid 2020, but please, can I keep my 2021? Because I've had the best time of my life for various reasons, practical and professional. But to me, 2021 was an incredible year. Relationships that grew stronger, opportunities that arose. And that was my experience. So I think that's the thing, as with COVID itself, nobody who has COVID seems to experience it in the same way. So my wife and I both had COVID, and our experience was entirely different. And so I think the whole pandemic, people experienced it differently. Everybody had their own experience, and some of that was terrible, and some of that was incredible experiences. Yes. I'm so glad for 2020. What we learned, what we experienced, and I came to realize that, so I'm a professional, and it's about my work, but all of us are people as well, and so we had personal experiences through that, and you can't really divorce your professional and your personal experience, and you would have known this now because we started working from home. That became really clear that the line between personal and professional is so blurred, and that became very clear during 2020 and this first part of this year as well.
Okay, that's a great way to end. I think off is once again is that silver lining. So going forward, we'll look for that silver lining and keep on finding ways to innovate what we do to adjust to new circumstances and hopefully not stop. So thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to add, if anyone who's listening in would like to join us in the chat, they can reach out to us via Facebook, or they can email us at marketing@eifecorp.co.za. We thank you so much for your time, and we hope to chat to you again in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jolene. Thanks for having me.